John wakes up one morning convinced that his and Sarah's life is peaceful and secure. However, an accidental discovery brings chaos to his world. John was making coffee while going through the mail. On the table, among a pile of letters, he noticed an envelope from a bank addressed to Sarah. Nothing unusual, but the name of the bank seemed unfamiliar to him. John opened the envelope, thinking it was just a regular account notice. What he saw made his heart sink. Debt to $2,045,000, last payment overdue. John read the email several times, trying to figure out what it meant. There must be some mistake, he thought. His wife Sarah had always been cautious in financial matters. For years, they had been planning for a comfortable retirement, saving money, and avoiding debt. His thoughts were interrupted by the phone ringing. It was Sarah, who said she was going to be in town for a meeting with friends. Her voice sounded as calm as ever. John started looking for more information. In his office, he opened a drawer that he rarely touched. On the inside were folders of documents. Flipping through the pages, he found several loan agreements that he had never seen before. A car loan, another one for furniture, a credit card with a $50,000 debt. John couldn't believe his eyes. His thoughts were jumbled. Why didn't she tell me? We always discussed everything. What made her take on these debts? And how long had it been going on? He felt a wave of fear and anger wash over him. The retirement they had dreamed of might be out of reach. John decided to call his friend Tom, who worked in banking. Tom listened to his story and advised him to talk to Sarah calmly. Don't jump to conclusions. First, find out what happened. Maybe it's not as bad as it seems. When Sarah returned home, she was in a good mood. She started to talk about her day, but noticed John's serious expression. What's wrong? She asked. John picked up a letter from the bank and silently handed it to her. Her face turned pale. Sarah, what does this mean? John could not hide his anger. She tried to say something, but her voice was trembling. I wanted to tell you. I just didn't know how. You didn't know how? We lost $250,000 and you didn't know how to tell me. Sarah looked down. It's a long story, John. I need time to explain it. John couldn't say another word. He left the room, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. His world had turned upside down in one day, and he knew that the answers he would receive could further destroy his life. Until the recent discovery of the debts, John and Sarah seemed like the perfect couple. Their life was built on trust, shared dreams, and plans for the future. John is a 60-year-old former engineer who has worked for a stable company all his life. His greatest pride is his family home, which he completed with his own hands. I wanted to create a home where Sarah and I could be happy for the rest of our lives, he often told his friends. John was organized and always kept his finances under control. He had carefully saved for retirement, hoping to travel, enjoy the outdoors, and spend time with the grandchildren they planned to have someday. Sarah is a 58-year-old former music teacher. Her warm personality and talent for playing the piano charmed everyone around her. She has always been dreamy and emotional. Her weakness was beauting new furniture, stylish home accessories, and sometimes expensive clothes. Life is too short to skimp on the things that bring you joy, she often said. The couple dreamed of a carefree retirement. I imagine us in a little house by the lake, Sarah once said, looking at a picturesque landscape in a magazine. Y'all play the piano and I'll fish, John replied, smiling. They also planned to go on a trip to Europe to see Paris, Rome, and Vienna, places Sarah had always dreamed of. Financial issues were always in the background in their marriage. John was responsible for large expenses and long-term planning. Sarah handled the day-to-day shopping, always emphasizing that she was a good saver. "I never spend more than I need to," she often said. But this assurance created the illusion of peace, but as it turned out, the reality was different. Their days went by in a regular rhythm: breakfast, talking about the news, walking in the park. John loved to work in the garden, and Sarah often played the piano or watched cooking shows. We complement each other perfectly. They told friends when they asked about the secret of their happy marriage. However, there were moments that John ignored. Sarah loved unexpected purchases. One day she came home with a new sofa, explaining it was a promotion. Another time, she bought an expensive living room chair that she said fit the interior perfectly. John joked that she could have become an interior designer, but in his heart he was worried about how much money it would take. A few years ago, John suggested that they create a budget to control expenses, but Sarah flatly refused. "I'm an adult, John. Don't you trust me?" she asked, and John never brought it up again. Now that John had found the documents about the debts, he began to realize that his idea of their life together was an illusion. How long has this been going on? What else do I not know? He asked himself. Then John was sitting at the kitchen table, the documents that had revealed the mystery of the debts lying in front of him. He looked at Sarah, who was nervously holding a cup of tea. "No, Sarah, I need to understand what's going on," he said, his voice sounding calm, but inside he was seething. "John, it's not what it seems," she began, avoiding his gaze. "I didn't want you to worry. I thought it would work out." What exactly will work out?" "Sarah, $30,000 on credit cards." "And that's just what I saw in those papers!" Sarah shivered. She knew this was the moment of truth. "I couldn't stop," she suddenly blurted out. I wanted our home to be perfect. You always said that comfort was the most important thing." John leaned back in his chair. "Comfort, Sarah. I was talking about a warm blanket and a cup of coffee, not designer furniture for the price of our car." Sarah lowered her head, her shoulders shaking. "I thought it was only temporary. Every time I told myself this is the last purchase, but then something new would come along, and I couldn't stop." John was silent, trying to comprehend her words. He could see her desperation, but it didn't change the fact that their finances were ruined. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, trying to remain calm. Sarah finally met his gaze. "You've always been so responsible, John. I didn't want you to be disappointed in me. I was afraid you wouldn't see me as the woman you loved anymore." These words pierced his heart. "Sarah, do you think I only see you through the prism of perfection?" I have always loved you for who you are, not for what you buy." "Then why are you looking at me like that now?" She shot back. "Because I'm disappointed, Sarah." John's voice rose for the first time. "You've been hiding this from me for years. We had dreams together, and now it's all in jeopardy." Sarah replied in tears. "I thought I could fix it before you found out. But things have gotten out of hand." John was sitting in his favorite coffee shop, staring at a cup of cold coffee. After the night's conversation with Sarah, he realized that it would be difficult to deal with this crisis on his own. I need to act," he whispered to himself, pulled out his phone and dialed the number of his old friend, financial advisor Rick. "John, you don't sound well." "What's wrong?" Rick asked after the first greeting. "We're in trouble, Rick." "Big ones. Sarah hid debts from me, and now I don't even know how to start fixing it." Rick sighed. "Come over to my place tonight. We'll talk it over. And bring Sarah if you can." That evening, the atmosphere in Rick's office was tense. Sarah looked confused, John looked exhausted. "First of all, let's get the scope right. Rick said as he opened his laptop. Sarah, is there anything else that John needs to know about? Sarah shook her head, her voice shaking. Everything I know is already in these documents. Rick looked over the files John had brought with him. This is serious, but not hopeless. We need to come up with a plan. How did we even get to this point? Asked John, speaking more to himself than to Rick. Many families find themselves in similar situations, Rick replied. But the important thing now is not to blame each other, but to work together. Easy for you to say, John grumbled. Rick suggested a few steps: contact the banks, review loan terms and refinancing options. Create a budget, determine which expenses can be cut. Look for additional income. Both should think about ways to make money. John, do you have any assets you can sell or rent out? Asked Rick. I have a boat, but I'm not ready for that, John admitted. Then we need to find other ways, Rick concluded. The next day, Sarah met with her best friend Carol, who had experience with financial difficulties. Sarah, I know how hard this is, Carol said. But you have to show John that you are ready to change. It's the only way to save your marriage. I'm afraid he doesn't trust me anymore, Sarah replied. Trust is earned through actions, not words, Carol firmly. John and Sarah realized that they needed to work together to get out of this situation. The support of their friends and Rick's advice gave them hope, but they still had a long way to go. John and Sarah sat at the kitchen table. The silence was oppressive, every word hanging in the air like a threat. John was the first to speak up. Sarah, I want to hear everything, now. No sugarcoating, no sugarcoating. His voice was even, but with a hint of deep disappointment. Sarah lowered her head, swallowing back tears. Knew she couldn't take any more time. I don't know how to explain it. She began in a shaky voice. It started a few years ago when I first ordered that designer desk you said was too expensive. John froze. The desk. This is about the desk. No, John, it's not just that. Sarah took a deep breath. I just wanted us to have something beautiful, like those families I saw in the magazines. And then I started spending more. First little things, then bigger things. But I always thought I could cover it all. Cover it. John couldn't help but laugh sarcastically. And how did you plan to do that, Sarah? I don't know. Her eyes filled with tears. Sarah admitted that most of the expenses went to expensive jewelry, travel she had planned for herself, and even loans she took out to pay for the purchases. I wanted to feel better about myself. Everyone around me seemed so happy, so successful, and I just couldn't stay away. Sarah, why didn't you tell me? We could have found a solution together. John spoke slowly, as if weighing each word. I was afraid, John, and I was afraid that you would judge me, that you'd think I didn't know how to manage money, and I was afraid of losing you. Her voice broke. John exhaled a heavy breath. But that's exactly what you did. You didn't lose me because of the spending, Sarah. You lost me because of a lie. John's words fell like a stone into the water, and Sarah realized that her actions had jeopardized not only their finances, but the very foundation of their marriage. We can't start over until you're completely honest, John said. Is there anything else I should know? Sarah shook her head. No, that's it. You promise. John didn't hide his skepticism. John, I want to make it right. I'm ready to give away all my jewelry, sell what I can. We can start saving money. But why didn't you think of that before, Sarah? We could have avoided all this if you'd just talked to me. John left the table and walked out of the room, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. Would he be able to forgive her? And was this really all that Sarah was hiding? John sat on a park bench, looking out over a quiet pond. His thoughts were scattered like shards of broken glass. The whole life he had built with Sarah seemed like a ghost now. Is it possible to start all over again? Was the question that kept running through his mind. John returned home late at night. Sarah was sitting in the living room, curled up in a chair. She didn't even notice him come in. We need to talk, John said, sitting down across from her. Sarah nodded, her face exhausted. I know we do, but first I want to apologize. John, I messed up. I understand if you can't forgive me. John exhaled heavily. Sarah, I've always considered you my partner. We've been through a lot together. But this isn't just a mistake. This is a betrayal of trust. I know, Sarah whispered, and I can't change the past. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix the future. You are. John raised his eyebrows. But how can I be sure you won't keep anything from me anymore? Sarah took a deep breath and pulled an envelope from her pocket. Here. These are all our financial documents. I want you to see everything. No more secrets. John took the envelope and opened it. Debt amounts, credit card bills, shopping lists, it was all there. Why did you decide to give me this now? He asked. Because I want you to know that I'm ready for a change, she replied. John remembered how they had planned a trip to Italy together in their retirement, of how they had dreamed of buying a small house by the sea. All this now seemed distant and unattainable. Sarah, I don't know if I can ever trust you again, he said, raising his head. I understand. Her voice trembled. But please give me a chance to prove that I can change. John stood up and walked over to the window. He looked out at the city at night and was silent for a while before turning to her. I'll stay, he finally said. But we have to work on this together. And it's not going to be easy. Sarah looked up, her eyes filled with tears. Thank you, John. I promise I will do everything I can to make up for my mistakes. John was sitting in his workshop, his hands involuntarily going through his old tools. Here, among the familiar things, he always found peace. But this time his thoughts were like a storm. The decision he had to make would determine the rest of his life. John knew he had two choices: stay with Sarah and work on their marriage, or leave everything behind and start a new life. I love her, he told himself. But is it enough to forget her lies? He remembered all the moments of their life, from the joy of their first home to the hard times when they supported each other. But now his heart was heavy with doubt. John called his old friend Michael, who had always been his voice of reason. Michael, I don't know what to do. John said when they met in a cafe. John, the decision has to be yours. Michael replied. But I know one thing: if you stay, it has to be your choice, not a compromise with yourself. And how do I know that? Listen to your heart. But remember, trust is not something that comes back quickly. That evening John returned home. Sarah was waiting for him in the living room. Sarah, I have something to say, he began. I'm listening, she replied, her hands in her lap. I have decided to stay. But there are conditions. I'm willing to do anything. Her voice trembled, but there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. First, I want us to open a joint account. All finances will be transparent from now on. Okay, I agree. Second, we're going to see a financial advisor and maybe a marriage counselor. Sarah nodded. I'm ready for that. After this conversation, John felt relieved. It was a difficult decision, but he realized he wanted to give their marriage a chance. I can't guarantee that things will be the same, he told himself. But I'm going to try. It was a sunny morning, but John felt a weight in his heart. The house was silent, broken occasionally by the sound of the coffee machine. Sarah was preparing breakfast, silently looking around the kitchen, which had become the center of many moments together. It's a new day, John thought, but uncertainty still weighed on him. After making a difficult decision, John and Sarah decided to give their marriage a second chance. They made an appointment to see a marriage counselor and a financial advisor. We need to figure how to get out of this situation, John said during the first session. The main thing is honesty, Sarah replied. I'm ready to do anything to correct my mistakes. The psychologist helped them see how years of accumulated resentment and silence had led to their crisis. Sarah admitted that her secret spending was an attempt to fill an inner void. I just wanted to feel needed, she admitted with tears in her eyes. Working on her financial problems also proved difficult. The counselor explained that it would take years to restore their stability. Look, we can make it, John said, although he didn't sound as confident as he wanted to. They started keeping a joint budget and discussing every major purchase. It was a new experience for them, but also a challenge. One day, Sarah surprised John by saying, I found a part-time job. It will help us pay off our debts faster. John was amazed. This is a big step for both of us, he said, feeling a new hope spring up in his heart. One evening, John sat on the porch with a cup of coffee. He looked at the sunset and thought about how much had changed in the past months. We are far from out of this situation, he said to himself. But we've started to move in the right direction. However, deep down, he still doubted whether he could fully forgive Sarah and whether they would have the strength to overcome all the difficulties. The next morning, John and Sarah had breakfast together. They laughed at little things, but there was still tension between them. What's next? Asked Sarah, looking at John. We just take it one step at a time, he replied. What would you do in John's shoes? Is it possible to build a new life on the ruins of an old one?